Arrest her. She doesn't belong here. Rebecca Wilson's voice cut through the peaceful afternoon air of Maple Grove, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Riverside County. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. This wasn't a typical emergency call. What happened that day would shock an entire community and change everything they thought they knew about justice and prejudice. A tiny 7-year-old girl named Olivia Johnson sat frozen on her bright pink bicycle. Tears streamed down her brown cheeks, creating glistening paths that caught the afternoon sunlight. Her small hands clutched a worn unicorn plushie named Luna. The stuffed animal's once vibrant purple fur had faded from years of being held, loved, and cried into. 3 police officers now stood in a semicircle around this child. Their imposing presence transformed what should have been a safe neighborhood into Olivia's nightmare. Their badges gleamed in the sunlight, and their expressions ranged from stern professionalism to uncomfortable uncertainty. Behind those officers stood Rebecca Wilson, the woman who had initiated this disaster. She was 45, with carefully highlighted blonde hair and clothes that screamed, "I belong in this neighborhood." She crossed her arms and looked satisfied, like someone who had finally caught a thief in the act. "I told you she doesn't belong in this neighborhood," Rebecca announced loudly, her voice carrying to the growing crowd of neighbors who had emerged from their manicured lawns to witness the commotion. Each word deliberately marked Olivia as an outsider, a threat, something to be removed. Olivia's world collapsed around her. Through her tears, in a tiny broken voice, she whispered words that would haunt everyone present. "I want my mommy." This wasn't just a cry for help. This was a desperate plea from a child who couldn't understand why adults had turned her innocent afternoon into a terrifying ordeal. But those 4 simple words carried more weight than anyone could imagine. What Rebecca Wilson didn't know, what the officers had no idea about, was that something was about to happen that would turn this entire situation upside down. The truth was coming, and it would expose ugly assumptions and reveal the terrible consequences of judging people by the color of their skin. If you believe children deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance, subscribe and type "justice" in the comments. You'll receive a heartwarming reply from True Stories. The event that triggered this disaster wasn't criminal activity or dangerous behavior. It wasn't anything that should have involved law enforcement. What started this nightmare was something pure, innocent, and childlike. When you hear it, you'll understand how deeply wrong everything that followed truly was. Let's go back to where it all began, 45 minutes earlier, when 7-year-old Olivia Johnson was simply being what every child deserves to be: curious, excited, and completely innocent. To understand how this situation spiraled so dramatically out of control, you need to know about 3 key people whose paths collided on that fateful afternoon. Their stories will reveal exactly how prejudice, assumptions, and bitter hearts can shatter a child's innocence in mere moments. The stakes were higher than anyone realized. Lives would change. Careers would hang in the balance. A community would be forced to confront its deepest biases. And at the center of it all was a little girl who just wanted to find pretty rocks like her daddy had taught her. This is a story about power. Who has it, who abuses it, and what happens when it's challenged. It's about the courage to stand up for what's right, even when doing so requires confronting uncomfortable truths. Most importantly, it's about the moment when justice finally arrives, and those who weaponized authority against innocence must face the consequences of their actions. The reckoning was coming, and no one was prepared for it. Let's start with Olivia Johnson, the sweetest 7-year-old you could ever imagine. On that fateful morning, Olivia wore her favorite purple dress with sparkly unicorn sneakers that lit up with each step. She was small for her age, with bright brown eyes that radiated curiosity and a smile that could melt even the coldest heart. Olivia was new to Maple Grove, this fancy neighborhood where houses cost more than most people earned in 5 years. But Olivia wasn't just any ordinary little girl. She collected colorful rocks and kept them in a special wooden box her father had made for her before his final deployment. She loved butterflies and spent hours watching them dance in gardens, naming each one she saw regularly. Olivia had the biggest dreams you've ever heard from a 7-year-old. She wanted to be a princess scientist who would discover new planets and maybe find butterflies living on them too. Her imagination knew no bounds, fueled by bedtime stories and the encouragement of parents who taught her to see possibilities everywhere. The most precious thing Olivia owned was her stuffed unicorn named Luna. Luna wasn't just any toy. This worn, well-loved unicorn was the last gift Olivia's daddy gave her before he left for his final military deployment. He never came home. Luna held all of Olivia's memories of bedtime stories, piggyback rides, and promises that Daddy would always watch over her from heaven. Luna helps me be brave, Olivia would tell anyone who asked about her constant companion. Daddy put extra special brave inside her before he went to heaven. Olivia carried Luna everywhere because it made her feel like her father was still protecting her. The unicorn had been stitched back together multiple times, its horn slightly crooked from years of being clutched during nightmares and thunderstorms. But to Olivia, Luna was perfect. Despite her natural shyness, Olivia was incredibly curious about everything around her. She was excited about making new friends in this new neighborhood. Her mama had worked so hard to give them this fresh start, and Olivia wanted to make her proud. She also wanted to make her daddy proud, even though he now watched over her from the stars. Daddy says there are treasures everywhere if you just look hard enough, she would often say, repeating the words her father had told her during their rock-hunting adventures. This philosophy made Olivia see the world differently than most children her age. Where others saw ordinary sidewalks, Olivia saw potential discoveries waiting to be found. At 38 years old, Amara Johnson had fought for every single achievement in her distinguished career. She was the police chief of Riverside County, one of the most powerful law enforcement positions in the state. But Amara's path to the top wasn't easy. She was one of only 3 black women to ever hold such a high-ranking position in the county's history. Her appointment had made headlines 2 years earlier, with the newspaper featuring her serious, determined face above the headline, "Johnson makes history as new police chief." Amara was a single mother who worked double shifts, sometimes 16 hours straight, to afford their new home in Maple Grove. She chose this neighborhood for one primary reason: the school district. Amara wanted Olivia to have every opportunity she never had growing up. She wanted her daughter to attend schools with the best resources, the most qualified teachers, and the safest environments. "My daughter deserves every chance," Amara often said to herself during those late nights reviewing departmental policies. "Every door that was closed to me will be open for her." Standing at 5'8" with close, cropped natural hair that showed hints of early gray, Amara carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had overcome countless obstacles. Her uniform was always impeccable, but today she wore a crisp navy pantsuit for her presentation to the city council. The small golden badge pinned to her lapel was the only indication of her authority. Amara had met her husband Marcus during college. They'd both been criminal justice majors with dreams of reforming law enforcement from within. Marcus had joined the military after graduation, while Amara entered the police academy. They'd planned to eventually work together, creating programs to build trust between police and communities of color. His death during his 3rd deployment had shattered those shared dreams, leaving Amara to carry their vision alone. At 15, Amara herself had been handcuffed and detained by police officers who assumed she'd stolen the expensive bicycle her parents had saved for months to give her as a birthday present. That humiliating experience had fueled her determination to change policing from within. "There's a difference between enforcement and protection," she frequently told new recruits. Our job is to protect everyone, not just those who look like they belong. That morning, Amara had walked Olivia to her first day at Maple Grove Elementary. She'd kissed her daughter goodbye and promised to pick her up after school. Then Amara left for work early, heading into what would become one of the longest days of her career. She had no idea that while she was fighting for justice in city council meetings, her own daughter would become a victim of the very prejudice Amara fought against every single day. There was a third person in this story, someone whose bitterness and fear would transform an innocent afternoon into a nightmare. Rebecca Wilson was 45 years old and lived in the house directly across from the Johnson family. Rebecca called herself the neighborhood watch coordinator, but in reality, she was just a woman who had lost control of her own life and was desperately trying to control everyone else's. Rebecca was recently divorced. Her husband of 20 years, Robert, had left her for his 28-year-old secretary after 2 decades of marriage. He'd gotten the house they built together, most of their savings, and even their social circle. Rebecca was left with nothing but bitterness and the small house she had inherited from her mother. Then she'd lost her job at the bank where she had worked for 15 years. Budget cuts, they said. But Rebecca knew the truth. At 45, she was too expensive, too bitter, and too broken to compete with younger employees who would work for less and complain less. What few people knew was that Rebecca had once applied to the police academy the same year as Amara Johnson. Rebecca had been rejected due to psychological evaluation concerns, while Amara had been accepted and eventually risen through the ranks. This hidden connection fueled Rebecca's resentment even more, though she'd never admit it publicly. The neighborhood became Rebecca's last source of control. If she couldn't manage her marriage or her career, at least she could monitor who belonged in Maple Grove and who didn't. She watched every new family that moved in, noting their habits, their visitors, their adherence to neighborhood rules about lawn maintenance and garbage bins. When the Johnson family arrived 2 weeks earlier, something dark awakened in Rebecca's heart. For 14 days, Rebecca watched Sarah and Olivia's every move. She timed when they left for work and school. She noted who visited their house. She watched them through her window like a predator stalking prey. Rebecca was suspicious of everything they did, and she was just waiting for an excuse to act on her prejudice. She'd already complained to the HOA about the Johnsons' garbage bins being left out too long they weren't, and about suspicious visitors, Amara's fellow officers dropping off paperwork. This neighborhood has standards, Rebecca frequently told anyone who would listen. That's why we all paid premium prices to live here. We have to protect our investment. What Rebecca really meant was that she had very specific ideas about who belonged in Maple Grove, and the Johnsons didn't fit that image. Not in her mind. Officer James Hayes was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for being thorough and by the book. At 42, his once athletic frame had softened somewhat, but his piercing blue eyes missed nothing. Hayes took pride in his record of fair treatment, but he also believed firmly in procedure and protocol. Divorced with 2 teenagers, Hayes was counting the years until retirement. Officer Michael Kelly had been on the force for 10 years and prided himself on being tough on crime. At 36, he maintained a gym-sculpted physique and a no-nonsense attitude that some colleagues found intimidating. Kelly saw the world in black and white, with little room for gray areas. He believed firmly that rules existed for a reason, and that breaking them, any of them, warranted consequences. Officer Elena Rodriguez was a rookie just 8 months out of the academy. At 26, she was still learning how to navigate complex situations. Her father had been a respected officer who had been forced out of the department years ago after speaking up against racial profiling. Elena had joined the force partly to continue his legacy of fair policing. She was observant, empathetic, and sometimes too hesitant to voice her concerns to senior officers. Maria Sanchez worked as a dispatcher at the 911 call center. A 20-year veteran of emergency services, Maria knew every officer by voice and could often sense when calls were legitimate emergencies versus neighborhood disputes or prejudice-driven complaints. At 48, Maria had seen it all and developed an intuition about which calls needed priority response. Mrs. Gabriela Ramirez was an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from the Johnsons. At 72, she had raised 3 children in Maple Grove and witnessed the neighborhood's transformation over decades. A retired elementary school teacher, Mrs. Ramirez had a soft spot for children and a keen eye for injustice. Mr. Antonio Gonzalez lived across the street from the community mailboxes. At 56, he was a respected local business owner who had recently moved to Maple Grove after his children left for college. His landscape maintenance company employed many immigrants, and he was keenly aware of how appearances could trigger assumptions. These individuals would all play crucial roles in what was about to unfold on that sunny afternoon in Maple Grove. Their actions, or inactions, would determine whether justice would prevail or whether prejudice would claim another victim. That afternoon started like any other school day, but it would end in a way that changed everyone involved forever. Olivia had her first successful day at Maple Grove Elementary. She'd been nervous at first, clutching Luna so tightly that her teacher, Mrs. Hernandez, had gently suggested keeping the unicorn safe in her backpack during class time. "Luna can watch over you from here," says Hernandez had said, helping Olivia tuck the stuffed unicorn safely away. "And you can check on her whenever you need to." By lunchtime, Olivia had made a friend named Isabella, who loved butterflies just as much as she did. Isabella had shared her apple slices and shown Olivia her butterfly-shaped hair clips. "I have 17 different butterflies at home," Isabella had told her proudly. "My abuela sends them from Mexico. I have a special box for my rock collection," Olivia had replied shyly. "My daddy made it for me before he went to heaven." The 2 girls had pinky promised to show each other their collections soon. During recess, they'd spotted a real butterfly near the fence and spent 20 minutes following it from flower to flower, giggling when it landed briefly on Isabella's shoulder. As the final bell rang, Mrs. Hernandez had called Olivia to her desk and presented her with a small gift, a child's magnifying glass with a purple handle. "I thought you might like this for your rock collection," Mrs. Hernandez had said with a warm smile. "My son used to collect rocks too. It helps you see all the special details." Olivia had been so touched by the gift that she'd given her teacher a spontaneous hug. "It's the perfect color," she'd exclaimed, admiring how the handle matched her favorite dress. When school ended, Olivia felt brave and happy for the first time since moving to Maple Grove. Her mother had arranged for her to wait at Mrs. Ramirez's house until she finished work, but Olivia had an hour before she needed to be there. "You can play in the neighborhood, but stay on our street," Amara had instructed that morning. "Don't talk to strangers and be at Mrs. Ramirez's by 4:30. With her new magnifying glass safely tucked in her backpack alongside Luna, Olivia decided to explore her new neighborhood on her pink bicycle. She wanted to ride around the block and look for special rocks, just like Daddy had taught her when she was smaller. He used to tell her that every rock had a story, and if she looked close enough, she might find treasures that other people missed. "The best discoveries," Marcus had told her, "are the ones most people walk right past without noticing." Olivia had no idea that across the street, Rebecca Wilson was watching her every move through her front window. Rebecca saw this 7-year-old child and didn't see innocence or curiosity. Rebecca saw something she feared, something she wanted to stop. And what Rebecca was about to do would turn Olivia's rock hunting adventure into the most terrifying experience of her young life. Olivia rode her pink bicycle slowly around the block, her unicorn sneakers glinting in the afternoon sun. The bike still had training wheels, Daddy had been planning to teach her to ride without them before he deployed. Now Mom promised they'd learn together when she had a day off. Olivia pedaled carefully, looking down at the ground every few feet, searching for the special rocks Daddy had taught her to find. In her small backpack, she carried the magnifying glass Mrs. Hernandez had given her that morning, along with Luna, who was keeping watch from inside the bag. The spring air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and flowering magnolias. Olivia hummed a soft tune to herself, a lullaby her father used to sing. As she reached the community mailboxes at the end of Maple Street, something caught her eye. There, half buried in the decorative mulch around the mailbox post, was the most beautiful rock she had ever seen. It was smooth and shiny with little sparkles that danced in the sunlight. Olivia's heart filled with excitement. This was exactly the kind of treasure Daddy had told her to look for. She carefully dismounted her bicycle, letting it rest against the mailbox post. Kneeling down, she gently extracted the rock from its bed of mulch. It fit perfectly in her small palm, cool and smooth to the touch. It was mostly gray, but when the light hit it just right, little flecks of silver and purple sparkled like tiny stars. "Daddy would love this one," she whispered to herself, turning it over to examine all sides. Olivia pulled out her new magnifying glass and held it over the rock. Through the lens, she could see tiny crystals that looked like diamonds embedded in the stone surface. They created a pattern that reminded her of the night sky. "Luna, look," she said excitedly, reaching into her backpack to touch her stuffed unicorn. "It's like the stars Daddy watches us from." Olivia giggled with pure joy. She imagined her father watching her from heaven, proud that she remembered his lessons about finding beauty in unexpected places. She was so absorbed in studying her treasure that she didn't notice the eyes watching her from across the street. Rebecca Wilson stood at her front window peering through the blinds. She watched Olivia examine the rock with her magnifying glass, and Rebecca's mind immediately jumped to the darkest possible explanation. Why was this child digging around the mailboxes? Why did she have that magnifying glass? What was she really doing in their neighborhood? Rebecca had been waiting for this moment for 2 weeks. Ever since the Johnson family moved in, she knew they would bring trouble. She just needed proof. And now, watching this little girl casing the neighborhood mailboxes, Rebecca believed she had found it. As Olivia continued to marvel at her discovery, holding it up to catch more light, Rebecca's suspicions hardened into certainty. In her mind, this wasn't an innocent child finding a rock. This was proof that she had been right all along. These people didn't belong here. Rebecca grabbed her phone from the counter and slipped on her sandals. This was her neighborhood. She was the watch coordinator, and she wasn't going to let this suspicious activity continue another minute. Not on her watch. Olivia was still kneeling by the mailbox, completely lost in wonder at her beautiful rock. She had no idea that danger was approaching straight for her. Rebecca Wilson had been watching the Johnson house from the moment they moved in 2 weeks ago. She'd observed the moving trucks, the police cruiser that sometimes parked in the driveway, and the little girl who seemed to always be carrying that ratty stuffed unicorn. Something about them bothered Rebecca deeply. It wasn't just that they were the only black family on the block, though that was part of it, though she'd never admit it out loud. It was the way the mother carried herself with such confidence, as if she belonged in Maple Grove without having to prove herself. "These houses cost a fortune," Rebecca had muttered to herself as she watched Amara unpack boxes. "How does she afford it? Something's not right." Rebecca's days had developed a new routine since the Johnsons moved in. Coffee by the window at 7:15 a.m., watching Amara and Olivia leave for work and school. Lunch at the same window, noting any visitors. Afternoon tea, while monitoring the street for Olivia's return. She'd started a detailed log in a notebook she kept by the window. Day 3. Woman in police uniform, Dropped off folder at 8:30 p.m. Suspicious timing. Day 5. Child playing on lawn unsupervised for 17 minutes. Day 8. Garbage bin left at curb until 7:45 p.m. Neighborhood rules state bins must be retrieved by 7:00 p.m. Today, Day 14. Rebecca was particularly alert. She'd overheard at the neighborhood association meeting that there had been mail theft in a nearby community. This information reinforced her suspicions about the new family. She'd been waiting for something to confirm her fears. When she saw Olivia approach the community mailboxes and start digging around in the mulch, Rebecca felt a surge of vindication. "I knew it," she whispered, her breath fogging the window slightly. "I knew they were up to something." Through her blinds, Rebecca observed Olivia pull something from the ground and examine it with what appeared to be some kind of tool. In Rebecca's mind, shaped by suspicion and prejudice, she wasn't seeing a child with a magnifying glass looking at a rock. She was seeing a suspicious person using a device to tamper with the mailboxes. Rebecca's heart raced with a combination of fear and excitement. This was her moment to protect the neighborhood, to prove her value, to show everyone that she had been right all along. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, already rehearsing what she would say when she confronted the child. Her mind created a narrative that had nothing to do with reality. This child was part of a mail theft ring, or perhaps they were planning to steal identities, or maybe they were casing the neighborhood for a future burglary. The thought never crossed Rebecca's mind that she was about to terrorize an innocent 7-year-old who was simply collecting rocks. The evidence was right in front of her eyes, but Rebecca could only see what her prejudice allowed her to see. With her phone clutched tightly in her hand, Rebecca marched out of her house with the fury of someone who felt she had been proven right. She crossed the street with heavy, angry steps, her eyes fixed on Olivia with laser-like intensity. As she approached, Rebecca rehearsed how she would report this incident to the neighborhood association, how they would finally take her concerns seriously, how perhaps they would even give her a more official title than self-appointed watch coordinator. What Rebecca didn't realize was that she was about to set in motion events that would expose her prejudice to the entire community and change Maple Grove forever. "What are you doing digging around our mailboxes?" Rebecca's voice cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife. The words were sharp, mean, and full of suspicion. Olivia looked up, startled. She had been so focused on her rock that she hadn't heard Rebecca approaching. Her first instinct was to share her excitement with this adult, the way children do when they find something wonderful. She held up the shiny rock with the biggest smile on her face. "Look what I found. My daddy taught me to look for special rocks. He said every rock has a story if you look close enough." Olivia's voice was pure innocence and joy, but Rebecca wasn't interested in childhood wonder. She snatched the rock right out of Olivia's small hand. "You're not supposed to be here," Rebecca said coldly. "Where are your parents? What are you really doing in this neighborhood?" Olivia's smile disappeared. She didn't understand why this woman was so angry or why she had taken her special rock. Her lower lip began to tremble. "That's my treasure," Olivia said quietly, her voice already shaking. "I found it fair and square. My daddy taught me." "I don't care what your daddy taught you," Rebecca interrupted. "You don't belong here. This is a good neighborhood. We don't have children running around unsupervised, digging through our property." Olivia tried to explain. "I live here now, with my mommy." She pointed vaguely down the street. "Where exactly?" Rebecca demanded, her voice sharp. Olivia's mind went blank with fear. She tried to remember their new address, but in her nervousness, she mixed up the numbers. "I live at 412 Maple Street," she said when her address was actually 4221 Maple Street. It was an innocent mistake that any 7-year-old might make when scared, but Rebecca pounced on this mistake like evidence of a crime. "Little girls don't lie unless they're up to something," Rebecca said with a cruel smile. "First, you're digging around our mailboxes. Now you're lying about where you live. What are you really doing here?" Olivia started to cry. These weren't the angry tears of a guilty child. These were the confused, frightened tears of an innocent little girl who didn't understand why an adult was being so mean to her. Olivia remembered her mother's safety rules. Always be polite to adults. If someone scares you, try to find a safe grown-up. Keep your hands where people can see them. Don't argue with adults even if they're wrong. But Olivia was confused. This was her own neighborhood. These should be safe adults. Why was this woman being so scary? Why wouldn't she listen when Olivia tried to explain? Rebecca watched Olivia cry and felt no sympathy. Instead, she interpreted those tears as proof of guilt. "Crying won't help you now," Rebecca said. "I'm going to find out exactly what you're up to." That's when Rebecca pulled out her phone and started filming. "I'm documenting suspicious activity in our neighborhood," she announced, as if she was doing some kind of public service. Olivia saw the phone pointed at her and became even more scared. She didn't understand why this woman was taking pictures of her. Her mother had warned her about strangers taking pictures. Olivia tried to get back on her bicycle to ride home, but Rebecca wasn't done with her interrogation. Rebecca followed Olivia as she attempted to pedal away, but Olivia was only 7 years old. Her little legs couldn't pedal fast enough to escape a grown woman walking with purpose. "You're not going anywhere until we figure out what you're really doing here," Rebecca called out, still filming with her phone. Her voice was getting louder, more aggressive. Other neighbors started to notice the commotion. Mrs. Ramirez, who was watering her front garden, looked up with concern. Mr. Gonzalez, who was retrieving his mail, paused to observe the interaction. Olivia was crying harder now, panic setting in. In her desperation to get away, she pedaled too fast and lost control of her bicycle. The magnifying glass fell out of her backpack and crashed onto the sidewalk, shattering into pieces. Olivia stopped immediately. She got off her bike and knelt down to look at the broken glass. This wasn't just any magnifying glass. Mrs. Hernandez had given it to her on her very first day at her new school. It was her first gift from her new teacher, and now it was broken. Olivia started sobbing, not just from fear anymore, but from heartbreak. "Now you're destroying property," Rebecca shouted, still filming. "First you're digging around mailboxes. Then you're lying about where you live. Now you're breaking things and littering in our neighborhood." Olivia tried to pick up the pieces of broken glass, still crying. I'm sorry," she kept saying. "It was an accident. I'll clean it up. Please don't be mad at me." But Rebecca wasn't interested in apologies. She saw this as more evidence that she was right about this child being trouble. "Don't touch that glass. You're making an even bigger mess." The confrontation was escalating rapidly, with Rebecca becoming increasingly aggressive and Olivia becoming increasingly terrified. The stage was set for what would become a defining moment for Maple Grove, a moment when neighbors would either stand up against injustice or remain silent in the face of it. Mrs. Gabriela Ramirez had been watering her prized roses when she first noticed the commotion by the mailboxes. At 72, her eyesight wasn't what it used to be, but her hearing remained sharp. The harsh tone of Rebecca's voice immediately caught her attention. Setting down her watering can, Mrs. Ramirez squinted toward the street. What she saw made her heart sink. Little Olivia Johnson, the sweet child who had waved to her just yesterday, being confronted by Rebecca Wilson, the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian. Mrs. Ramirez had lived in Maple Grove for over 40 years. She'd raised 3 children here, taught at the local elementary school for decades, and witnessed the neighborhood's transformation from a diverse middle-class community to an increasingly exclusive enclave. She'd also seen Rebecca's behavior worsen since her divorce. "Dios mío," Mrs. Ramirez murmured, watching Olivia try to pick up broken glass while crying. She removed her gardening gloves and began walking toward the scene, her arthritic knees protesting with each step. Meanwhile, Antonio Gonzalez had just pulled into his driveway when he spotted the confrontation. He'd been on his way to check his mail when he saw Rebecca standing over Olivia's phone, voice raised even higher. Mr. Gonzalez knew Rebecca from neighborhood association meetings, where she frequently complained about declining standards and undesirable elements. He also recognized Olivia as the daughter of the new neighbor he'd briefly met last week, a polite professional woman who had mentioned working in law enforcement. The disparity between the aggressive adult and the terrified child made his stomach clench. "Excuse me," Mr. Gonzalez called out as he approached. "Is everything okay here?" Rebecca turned toward him, irritation flashing across her face at the interruption. "I've got this under control, Antonio. This child was tampering with the mailboxes, and now she's broken glass all over the sidewalk." Mr. Gonzalez looked down at Olivia, then at the scattered pieces of what was clearly a child's magnifying glass, then back at Rebecca's filming phone. Something didn't add up. "She looks pretty upset," he observed quietly. "Maybe we could—" "You people don't understand what you're seeing," Rebecca snapped, cutting him off. "This child has been acting suspiciously. She was tampering with mailboxes. She lied about her address. She destroyed property. I've called the police because this is obviously a serious situation." The phrase "you people" hung in the air, its implications clear. Mr. Gonzalez felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times when his accent or appearance triggered assumptions about his belonging. "But she's just a little girl," Mr. Gonzalez said, confused by Rebecca's aggressive response. "She's crying and scared. Maybe we could just help her find her parents instead of—" "You're being naive about the obvious situation here," Rebecca interrupted again. "Some of us actually care about protecting this neighborhood. Some of us aren't afraid to do what needs to be done when suspicious activity is happening right in front of our faces." By now, Mrs. Ramirez had reached them, slightly out of breath from her hurried walk. "Niña," she said gently to Olivia. "Are you okay?" Olivia looked up at Mrs. Ramirez through tear-filled eyes and shook her head. "I just found a pretty rock," she whispered. "And now my magnifying glass is broken, and this lady took my rock, and she's being mean, and I want my mommy." Mrs. Ramirez knelt down carefully, her old knees creaking, and put a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. "It's okay, mija. We'll find your mommy." Rebecca stepped between them. "Don't encourage her, Gabriela. She doesn't even know her own address. She's obviously not from this neighborhood." "I do know it," Olivia protested through her tears. "It's just, I got confused because I'm scared." More neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. The Thompsons from across the street stood watching from their driveway. The Patels had paused their evening walk to observe. Sarah Jenkins from the corner house approached slowly, concern etched on her face. "Rebecca, what's going on?" Sarah asked, eyeing the crying child with concern. "Neighborhood security issue," Rebecca replied tersely. "I've got it handled. Police are on their way." "Police?" Sarah echoed, looking shocked. "For a little girl?" "For suspicious activity," Rebecca corrected, her voice sharp. "I saw her using some sort of tool to examine our mailboxes. Mail theft is a federal crime." Olivia heard the word police and began crying harder. In her young mind, police only came for bad people. If they were coming for her, that meant she must be bad. "I'm not bad," Olivia whispered to herself, reaching into her backpack and pulling out Luna. She clutched the stuffed unicorn tightly to her chest. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just found a pretty rock. The gathering crowd created an uncomfortable dynamic. Some neighbors clearly sympathized with the terrified child. Others seemed unsure, looking to one another for cues about how to interpret the situation. A few stood with arms crossed, accepting Rebecca's version of events without question. Mrs. Ramirez stroked Olivia's hair gently. "Don't worry, Chiquita. We'll sort this out." But Rebecca wasn't interested in sorting anything out. She had made her judgment call the authorities, and now felt vindicated as more neighbors arrived to witness what she perceived as her protection of the community. What no one realized was that this confrontation was about to escalate far beyond anything anyone expected, and the consequences would reverberate through Maple Grove for years to come. What Rebecca Wilson did next crossed every line of human decency. Standing over a sobbing 7-year-old child surrounded by broken glass and clutching a stuffed unicorn, Rebecca pulled out her phone and dialed 911. But this wasn't a call for help. This was a calculated attack designed to weaponize the police against an innocent child. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered. Rebecca's voice changed completely. Gone was the angry neighborhood bully. Now she spoke with fake concern and calculated fear. "I need to report a suspicious person who's been casing houses in our neighborhood," Rebecca said deliberately, emphasizing Olivia's race as if it was evidence of criminal behavior. "It's a child, but she's been tampering with our community mailboxes." "Can you describe what you're seeing?" the dispatcher asked. "This child has been tampering with our community mailboxes using some kind of device to examine them," Rebecca lied. "She's been destroying property and acting very erratically. I think she might be abandoned or lost. She claims to live here, but she can't give a proper address. I'm concerned she's either been coached to case our neighborhood, or she's been abandoned here by adults who are up to no good." Every word Rebecca spoke was designed to paint Olivia as a threat. She described Olivia's magnifying glass as a device to make it sound like criminal equipment. She called Olivia's innocent rock collecting tampering with mailboxes. She twisted Olivia's tears of fear into erratic behavior. And most importantly, Rebecca made sure to emphasize Olivia's race, knowing exactly how that would influence the police response. "What's your location?" the dispatcher asked. "Maple Street in Maple Grove," Rebecca replied. "Near the community mailboxes. This is a good neighborhood. We've never had problems like this before. I think you need to send officers immediately before this situation gets worse." The dispatcher taking this call was Maria Sanchez, a 20-year veteran of the 911 center. She typed the address into her system as Rebecca continued describing the suspicious behavior. Something about this call felt off to Maria. The caller's tone didn't match the supposed emergency, and the description of a small child as a threat seemed exaggerated. "Is the child alone?" Maria asked, trying to get clearer information. "Yes, suspiciously alone," Rebecca emphasized. No parent would let their child wander around tampering with mailboxes unless something inappropriate was happening. "How old would you estimate this child is?" Maria pressed. "Young enough to look innocent, old enough to be taught to do things," Rebecca replied evasively. "Maybe 7 or 8. Maria's internal alarm bells were ringing louder. This didn't sound like an emergency. It sounded like a neighborhood dispute, possibly with racial undertones. She'd taken thousands of calls in her career, and she recognized the patterns of calls motivated more by prejudice than actual threat. As Maria typed the exact address into her system, 421 Maple Street, something made her pause. That address looked familiar. Maria pulled up the police department directory, and her heart sank. 421 Maple Street was the home address of Chief Amara Johnson. Maria's mind raced. She was hearing a report about a suspicious black child at the police chief's house. This couldn't be a coincidence. The child being described had to be Chief Johnson's daughter. Maria tried to call Chief Johnson directly, But there was no answer. She tried again, still nothing. Maria made a quick decision. She categorized the call as non-emergency neighborhood dispute, rather than suspicious person, which would affect how the responding officers approached the situation. What Maria didn't know was that Chief Johnson was sitting in the most important meeting of her career. The city council was discussing police reform initiatives that Amara had been fighting for all year. New training programs, community outreach, bias, awareness. Everything Amara believed would make policing better for everyone. Her phone was on silent because this meeting could determine the future of law enforcement in their county. Amara sat at that conference table passionately arguing for policies that would protect innocent people from exactly what was happening to her daughter at that very moment. The irony was heartbreaking. While Amara fought for justice in that meeting room, her own child was being targeted by the very prejudice Amara spent her career trying to eliminate. Back on Maple Street, Olivia heard Rebecca talking to someone on the phone, and even at 7 years old, she understood enough to be terrified. Olivia had heard the word police come out of Rebecca's mouth. In her young mind, police meant serious trouble. "I'm not bad," Olivia whispered to Luna, pressing the stuffed unicorn against her chest, as if it could shield her. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just found a pretty rock." But Rebecca's words had planted seeds of doubt in Olivia's mind. Maybe she was bad. Maybe she wasn't supposed to touch that rock. Maybe she wasn't supposed to be in this neighborhood. Maybe Mommy would be angry at her when she found out the police were coming. Mrs. Ramirez watched this scene unfold from beside Olivia, and finally couldn't stay silent anymore. Her maternal instincts overcame her fear of Rebecca's aggressive behavior. "Little girl, you okay?" Mrs. Ramirez asked in her gentle voice, her accent warm and comforting. She could see that Olivia was scared and crying, and every grandmother instinct in her body told her this child needed help, not police. Olivia looked up at Mrs. Ramirez with tear-filled eyes. Here was an adult who wasn't yelling at her, who wasn't taking pictures of her, who spoke to her with kindness. "I want my mommy," Olivia whispered. "Where is Mommy? Where is Mommy?" Mrs. Ramirez asked softly, kneeling down to Olivia's level, despite her arthritic knees protesting. "She's at work," Olivia said through her tears. "She's the police chief. She helps people. She would make this lady stop being mean to me." Mrs. Ramirez's eyes widened. This child's mother was the police chief. That meant Rebecca had called the police on the police chief's daughter. Mrs. Ramirez looked over at Rebecca, who was still on the phone, still lying to the dispatcher about Olivia's behavior. The sound of sirens in the distance made everyone freeze. Rebecca's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Mr. Gonzalez looked worried. Mrs. Ramirez held Olivia's hand tighter. And Olivia's world collapsed completely. "The police are coming for me," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with absolute terror. "I'm going to jail. I'll never see Mommy again." At that very moment across town in the Riverside County Administration Building, Chief Amara Johnson stood before the city council, delivering the most important presentation of her career. The wood-paneled chamber was filled with local officials, community leaders, and several of Amara's key officers. "What we're proposing today isn't just a policy change," Amara said, her voice steady and authoritative, as she gestured to the slide behind her, showing statistics on community policing outcomes. "It's a fundamental shift in how we approach our responsibility to protect and serve everyone in this county." Amara had spent months preparing for this meeting. The comprehensive police reform package she was presenting included enhanced training on implicit bias, new community engagement programs, revised use of force policies, and accountability measures that would transform the department. Mayor Richardson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. These programs will be expensive, Chief Johnson. How do you justify the additional budget requirements during these tight fiscal times? Amara had anticipated this question. She clicked to the next slide, which showed comparative data from departments that had implemented similar reforms. The data is clear, Mayor, she replied confidently. Departments that have invested in these reforms have seen decreased litigation costs, improved officer retention, and most importantly, measurable improvements in community trust and cooperation. This isn't an expense, it's an investment with proven returns. City Councilwoman Peterson, a longtime skeptic of police reform, tapped her pen against her notepad. And you believe officers will embrace these changes? My understanding is that many in your department feel these measures undermine their authority. Amara took a deep breath. This was the heart of the resistance she'd been facing since her appointment as chief. She glanced briefly at her phone on the table, which she had silenced for this crucial meeting. The screen was dark. Change is never easy, Amara acknowledged. But the best officers, the ones who truly embody what it means to protect and serve, understand that earned trust is more powerful than demanded compliance. As she spoke those words, Amara briefly thought of Olivia. Everything she did was ultimately for her daughter. To create a world where Olivia wouldn't face the same prejudices and barriers that Amara had confronted throughout her career. Let me share a personal experience, Amara continued, deviating slightly from her prepared remarks. When I was 15, I was handcuffed and detained by officers who assumed I had stolen my own bicycle, a birthday gift my parents had saved for months to give me. That experience could have turned me against law enforcement forever. The room grew quiet, as Amara rarely shared personal stories. Instead, it showed me the critical importance of how officers perceive the communities they serve. Those officers didn't see a teenager with a new bike. They saw someone who didn't belong with something they shouldn't have. Amara clicked to a slide showing training scenarios designed to challenge officer perceptions. Our reformed training program directly addresses these perceptual biases. We're teaching officers to question their initial assumptions and gather facts before acting. What Amara didn't know, couldn't know, was that at that very moment, her own daughter was experiencing exactly the kind of prejudice she was working to eliminate. While Amara passionately advocated for a better approach to policing, Olivia was surrounded by officers responding to a call steeped in the very biases Amara was fighting against. Councilman Davis, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. Chief Johnson, I've reviewed your proposal thoroughly. It's ambitious, perhaps even visionary, but I have one fundamental question. Do you believe these reforms will actually change how people see and treat each other? Amara thought of Marcus then, of the promises they had made to each other and to their unborn child, as they lay in bed dreaming of the future. Institutional change shapes individual behavior, Amara answered thoughtfully. When we create systems that reward fairness and accountability, we begin to shift the culture. It won't happen overnight, but yes, Councilman Davis, I believe these reforms will gradually transform how our officers interact with the community and how the community perceives our officers. Mayor Richardson nodded, seemingly impressed by her conviction. You've clearly put enormous thought into this proposal, Chief. I think He was interrupted by Amara's assistant, Lieutenant Collins, who had slipped quietly into the room and was now urgently gesturing to her from the doorway. Excuse me, Mayor, Council members, Amara said, momentarily confused by the interruption. May I have a brief moment? The mayor nodded, and Amara stepped away from the podium, crossing to where Lieutenant Collins stood, his face tight with concern. What is it, Collins? She asked quietly. Chief, there's an incident at your address, he whispered. Multiple units responded to a call about a suspicious person. Dispatch has been trying to reach you. Amara's heart stopped. Olivia? She whispered, her professional composure cracking for just a moment. Collins nodded grimly. I don't have details, but Maria from dispatch recognized your address and called me directly. She said it sounds like a neighbor called it in. In that moment, Amara Johnson was not the chief of police presenting a groundbreaking reform package. She was a mother whose child might be in danger. The irony of the situation, advocating for fairer policing while her own daughter potentially faced biased treatment, was not lost on her. I need to go, she said decisively, already moving toward the door. Lieutenant, please apologize to the council and let them know there's a family emergency. As Amara rushed from the chamber, her mind raced with possibilities, each more concerning than the last. Her phone, now in her hand, showed multiple missed calls from dispatch. She had turned off the ringer for the meeting, something she rarely did. Amara's car sped through the streets of Riverside County, lights flashing but siren off. As a mother, she was terrified. As the chief of police, she was furious. Whatever was happening at her home, it represented either a tragic misunderstanding or something far worse, the very prejudice she had dedicated her career to fighting. The cruel irony was not lost on her. At the exact moment she was advocating for reforms to prevent bias-motivated police actions, her own daughter might be experiencing exactly that. The personal and professional collided in a way Amara had never anticipated, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Back on Maple Street, Olivia's terror grew with each passing second. The distant wail of sirens was getting louder, and she felt trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Her small body trembled as she clutched Luna tighter, the stuffed unicorn now damp with tears. What will the police do to me? Olivia whispered to Mrs. Ramirez, her voice barely audible over the approaching sirens. Mrs. Ramirez stroked Olivia's hair gently. Nothing, mija. You've done nothing wrong. I will stay right here with you. But Rebecca's satisfied expression and the gathering crowd of uncertain neighbors did nothing to reassure Olivia. In her 7 years, she had absorbed enough from the world around her to know that sometimes bad things happened to people who looked like her, even when they hadn't done anything wrong. Her father had once sat her down for what he called an important talk. He had explained in gentle terms that some people might treat her differently because of the color of her skin. It's not fair, and it's not right, he had told her. But you need to know that if a police officer ever speaks to you, you must be very polite, keep your hands where they can see them, and tell them your name and address clearly. Olivia tried to remember these instructions now, but fear had scrambled her thoughts. She couldn't even remember her own address correctly when Rebecca had asked. How would she explain herself to the police? She remembered watching her mother put on her uniform, the badge catching the light as Amara explained that police officers were supposed to help people. That's why Mommy became one, Amara had told her, to make sure everyone gets treated fairly. But if police were supposed to help people, why did it feel like they were coming to hurt her? Olivia's smartwatch, a special device her mother had given her for emergencies, was strapped to her wrist. With shaking fingers, she pressed the button that was supposed to call her mother. The small screen lit up, showing her mother's smiling face, but then displayed, "Call failed." "Mommy, help me," Olivia said to the watch anyway, not understanding that the call hadn't connected. "Mommy, please come home. There's a scary lady, and she called the police on me. I didn't do anything bad, I promise. I just found a pretty rock like Daddy taught me." Olivia kept talking to the watch, as if her mother could hear her becoming more desperate with each word. "Mommy, I'm scared. I want to come home. I want you to make the scary lady go away. Please, Mommy, please help me." But the watch wasn't connected. Olivia's desperate pleas for help were going nowhere. She was completely alone, facing a situation no child should ever have to face. Mr. Gonzalez had been watching the situation with increasing concern. He had daughters of his own now grown, and seeing a child in such distress awakened deep protective instincts. He stepped closer to Olivia, and Mrs. Ramirez deliberately positioning himself between them and Rebecca. "Young lady," he said gently to Olivia, "my name is Mr. Gonzalez. I live right over there." He pointed to his house across from the mailboxes. "Can you tell me your mother's name? Maybe we can call her." Olivia looked up, hope flickering briefly in her tear-filled eyes. "Her name is Chief Amara Johnson. She's the police chief. She has a special phone for work." Mr. Gonzalez and Mrs. Ramirez exchanged surprised glances. The police chief. This child was the daughter of the police chief. Rebecca, who had been listening while pretending to speak to someone else on her phone, faltered slightly. A flash of uncertainty crossed her face, quickly replaced by stubborn determination. "She's obviously lying again," Rebecca said loudly. "Do you really believe this child is the police chief's daughter? That's ridiculous." But Mr. Gonzalez ignored her, keeping his focus on Olivia. "Your mom is Chief Johnson. I think I met her last week when she moved in." Olivia nodded vigorously. "We have a blue door and a swing on the porch, and Mommy's police car sometimes is in the driveway." Mrs. Ramirez's expression hardened as she looked toward Rebecca. "You called the police on the police chief's daughter. Dios mío. Rebecca, what have you done?" Rebecca's face flushed, but she doubled down. "I don't care who her mother claims to be. This child was behaving suspiciously, and I'm doing my duty as neighborhood watch coordinator." The crowd of neighbors had grown larger. Some were filming with their phones. Others whispered among themselves. A few looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. The Patel family had joined the onlookers, their 10-year-old son Raj watching with wide eyes. "Dad," he said loudly enough for others to hear, "that's Olivia from school. She's in Ms. Hernandez's class. She showed me her unicorn today." This simple confirmation from another child seemed to shift something in the atmosphere. Neighbors began to exchange glances, reevaluating the scene before them. A recognized student from the local elementary school, identified by name by another child, didn't fit the suspicious person narrative Rebecca was pushing. The sirens were very close now. Olivia could see the flashing lights at the end of the street. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, the beginnings of a panic attack. Luna was clutched so tightly to her chest that the stuffed unicorn's head was bent at an unnatural angle. "I want my mommy," Olivia repeated the words, becoming a desperate mantra. "I want my mommy. I want my mommy." Mrs. Ramirez held her close, murmuring soothing words in a mixture of English and Spanish. Mr. Gonzalez stood protectively nearby, his phone now out, as he tried to find a number for the police department to verify Olivia's claims about her mother. As the first police car turned onto Maple Street, lights flashing and siren wailing, Olivia buried her face in Mrs. Ramirez's shoulder, unable to watch what was coming next. The elderly woman held her tightly, glaring at Rebecca with undisguised contempt. "Shame on you," Mrs. Ramirez said, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Shame on you for doing this to a child." Rebecca didn't respond. Her moment of triumph was approaching, but something had shifted. The crowd wasn't rallying behind her, as she had expected. Instead, there was a growing current of doubt and disapproval. As the police car doors opened and officers began to emerge, the consequences of Rebecca's actions were about to become clear to everyone involved. What she had set in motion out of prejudice and spite was about to spiral far beyond her control. 3 police cars pulled up to the scene in quick succession, their flashing lights painting the peaceful neighborhood in alternating red and blue. The first to arrive was Officer James Hayes, a 15-year veteran who prided himself on being thorough and professional. He emerged from his vehicle with the measured movements of someone who had responded to thousands of calls throughout his career. Following close behind was Officer Michael Kelly, 10 years on the force, and known for his no-nonsense approach to law enforcement. Kelly surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes, taking in the crowd of neighbors, the crying child, and the woman standing with her phone still raised. The last to approach was Officer Elena Rodriguez, just 8 months out of the academy. She hung slightly back, observing the situation with growing discomfort. Her training had emphasized community policing and de-escalation, but she was still learning how to apply those principles in the field. The officers had received the call through dispatch as a potential case of suspicious activity involving the community mailboxes, a possible federal offense. But what they saw upon arrival didn't match the urgency implied by the call: a small child clutching a stuffed unicorn, surrounded by concerned neighbors, and one very agitated woman who appeared to be filming the entire incident. Officer Hayes approached Rebecca first, as she was clearly the one who had called them. "Ma'am, are you the one who reported suspicious activity?" "Yes, officer. Thank you for coming so quickly," Rebecca said, her voice now modulated to sound concerned rather than accusatory. "I witnessed this child tampering with our mailboxes using some sort of tool. When I questioned her, she couldn't give a proper address, and then she broke that glass on the sidewalk." She pointed to the shattered magnifying glass. Officer Kelly looked over at Olivia, who was now hiding her face against Mrs. Ramirez's shoulder, still sobbing quietly. Even to his experienced eyes, this looked like a scared little girl, not a criminal threat. But dispatch had reported suspicious behavior, and Officer Kelly knew that appearances could be deceiving. "Can you tell me exactly what you observed, ma'am?" Officer Hayes asked, taking out his notepad. "I saw her digging around the base of the community mailboxes with some kind of tool, like a small magnifying glass or something," Rebecca explained, gesturing dramatically. She was examining the area very carefully, like she was looking for something specific, or maybe planning something. When I approached her, she got very defensive and couldn't tell me where she lives. She claimed to live on this street but gave the wrong address. Officer Rodriguez felt immediately uncomfortable with the situation. Her training told her to investigate thoroughly, but her instincts were screaming that something was very wrong here. A 7-year-old child with a stuffed animal didn't match the threat level that dispatch had described. She moved slightly closer to where Olivia was being comforted by Mrs. Ramirez, noting the genuine concern on the elderly woman's face. This didn't look like a random bystander helping a suspicious person. It looked like a grandmother comforting a terrified child. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez addressed Mrs. Ramirez gently, "do you know this child?" Mrs. Ramirez nodded firmly. "Yes, this is Olivia. She just moved to the neighborhood with her mother. She's a good girl. She was just looking at rocks with her magnifying glass. This woman," she gestured toward Rebecca with obvious disdain, "scared her and made her drop the magnifying glass." Officer Hayes, overhearing this exchange, turned back to Rebecca with a slightly skeptical expression. "Ma'am, you reported suspicious activity involving our mailboxes. Was mail actually tampered with or removed?" Rebecca hesitated, realizing that her story was beginning to unravel under basic questioning. "Well, I didn't actually see her take anything, but she was definitely examining the area in a suspicious manner. And look at the evidence. She can't even tell me her correct address. That's suspicious, isn't it?" Officer Kelly, meanwhile, had approached Olivia and Mrs. Ramirez. His imposing figure caused Olivia to shrink back in fear. "Hello there," Officer Kelly said, his voice gruff, despite his attempt to sound friendly. "Can you tell me your name and where you live?" Olivia looked up at the tall officer, his uniform and badge triggering even more fear. Her mother wore a uniform too, but this felt completely different. This felt like danger. My name is Olivia Johnson," she managed to stammer through her tears. I live. Her mind went blank again from fear, the address numbers jumbling in her head. "She lives at 421 Maple Street," Mrs. Ramirez interjected. She just moved here with her mother. She's only 7 years old, officer. She got scared and confused when this woman started yelling at her. Officer Rodriguez had been listening intently, and something clicked in her mind. 421 Maple Street. She repeated a memory surfacing from her recent training. That address sounded familiar. She stepped away from the group and spoke quietly into her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Rodriguez. Can you confirm the resident at 421 Maple Street? The last name is Johnson." After a brief pause, Maria Sanchez's voice came through the radio. "Officer Rodriguez, that address is registered to Chief Amara Johnson. That's her residence." Officer Rodriguez's eyes widened. They were questioning the police chief's daughter based on a neighbor's complaint. This situation had just become much more complicated. She approached Officer Hayes and spoke in a low voice. "Sir, I just confirmed with dispatch. The child lives at 421 Maple Street, which is registered to Chief Johnson. This is the chief's daughter." Officer Hayes froze, momentarily processing this information. They had responded to a call about a suspicious person, only to find that they were investigating their own boss's child based on what was increasingly looking like a neighbor's unfounded suspicions. Meanwhile, Mr. Gonzalez had stepped forward, addressing the officers directly. "Officers, I witnessed most of this incident. This child was simply looking at rocks near the mailbox with a magnifying glass. Ms. Wilson." He gestured toward Rebecca, approached her aggressively, and began questioning her. The child tried to leave on her bicycle, but was so frightened she dropped her magnifying glass. At no point did she do anything suspicious or criminal. The gathered neighbors were watching intently, many now filming the interaction with their phones. The narrative was shifting rapidly, and Rebecca could feel her position weakening with each passing moment. Officer Hayes turned back to Rebecca, his expression now stern. "Ma'am, based on what we're hearing from multiple witnesses, it appears this child was simply playing near the mailboxes, not tampering with them. Is there anything else you observed that would constitute an actual crime?" Rebecca's face flushed red. She was suspicious. "She doesn't look like she belongs in this neighborhood, and she broke that glass on purpose." The moment the words left her mouth, Rebecca realized her mistake. The true motivation behind her call was now exposed for everyone to hear. It wasn't about mailbox tampering or suspicious behavior. It was about a child who, in Rebecca's mind, didn't belong in Maple Grove because of how she looked. A murmur ran through the crowd of neighbors. Several exchanged uncomfortable glances. The Patels looked openly disgusted. Mrs. Ramirez held Olivia tighter, as if to shield her from the ugly truth that had just been revealed. Officer Rodriguez felt a surge of anger remembering her father's stories about being profiled during his time on the force. But she maintained her professional demeanor as she approached Olivia again, this time kneeling down to be at eye level with the frightened child. "Olivia," she said gently, "is your mom, Chief Johnson, the police chief?" Olivia nodded, her eyes still brimming with tears. "Yes, she's at a big meeting today. She helps people. She's going to be mad that I broke my magnifying glass. Mrs. Hernandez just gave it to me today." The pieces were falling into place for all three officers now. They had been called to investigate the police chief's daughter, based on what was clearly a racially motivated complaint, disguised as concern about suspicious activity. Officer Hayes exchanged a look with Officer Kelly, whose stern expression had given way to one of discomfort. They both knew this situation needed to be diffused quickly and professionally. But before they could take another step, the sound of tires screeching to a halt drew everyone's attention to the street, where a black SUV had just pulled up. The driver's door flew open, and a woman in a navy blue pantsuit emerged, her face a mask of controlled fury. Chief Amara Johnson had arrived. The scene that greeted Amara as she approached left her momentarily breathless, as if she'd been struck in the chest. Through the gaps in the gathered crowd, she could see her daughter, her baby, sitting on the curb beside Mrs. Ramirez, clutching Luna and sobbing. Officer Kelly stood over her notepad in hand, while Officers Hayes and Rodriguez positioned themselves nearby. The neighbors had formed a loose circle around them, some filming with their phones, others speaking in hushed tones. Rebecca Wilson stood slightly apart, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. For a split second, Amara hesitated. The professional in her wanted to assess the situation methodically to gather information before acting. But the sight of Olivia's tears shattered that instinct. Her daughter needed her mother, not the chief of police. Amara moved forward with purpose, and the crowd seemed to sense her authority before recognizing her identity. People stepped aside, creating a path without being asked. A murmur rippled through the gathering. "That's the chief. That's her mother. Oh my God!" Officer Hayes spotted her first, his eyes widening in recognition, and something that looked very much like dread. He straightened immediately, nudging Officer Kelly, who turned just as Amara reached the inner circle. The moment froze in time. Amara standing tall in her professional attire, the officers suddenly uncertain, Rebecca Wilson's expression shifting from righteousness to shock, and Olivia looking up with tear-filled eyes. "Mommy!" The cry broke the tableau. Olivia scrambled to her feet and ran toward Amara, Luna clutched in one hand. Amara knelt down, opening her arms, as Olivia crashed into her embrace with the force of relief and lingering fear. She held her daughter tightly, feeling the small body shaking with sobs against her chest. "It's okay, baby," Amara whispered, stroking Olivia's hair. "Mommy's here now. You're safe." For a long moment, Amara focused solely on comforting her child, shutting out everything else. The watching crowd, the officers, the entire situation. She murmured soothing words, rocking slightly the way she had when Olivia was smaller. "I was so scared," Olivia whispered against her mother's shoulder. "The lady was mean, and she took my rock, and my magnifying glass broke. And then the police came, and I thought I was going to jail, even though I didn't do anything bad." "You're not going anywhere," Amara assured her, pulling back slightly to look into Olivia's eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing." Amara wiped the tears from Olivia's cheeks with gentle thumbs, then pressed a kiss to her forehead. Only then did she stand, keeping Olivia close against her side, and turned to face the officers. "Chief Johnson," Officer Hayes began, clearly uncomfortable. "We were responding to a call about—" "I'm aware of why you're here, Officer Hayes," Amara interrupted, her voice controlled but vibrating with barely contained fury. "What I want to know is why my 7-year-old daughter was being interrogated like a criminal suspect." Officer Kelly stepped forward, his posture defensive. "Ma'am, Chief, we were following protocol for a suspicious person call. We had no way of knowing." "No way of knowing what, Officer Kelly?" Amara challenged. "No way of knowing that a 7-year-old child with a stuffed unicorn posed no threat. No way of knowing that a child looking at rocks with a magnifying glass wasn't tampering with federal property. Or no way of knowing that this child was the daughter of your commanding officer." The questions hung in the air unanswerable, because the truth behind them was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. Officer Rodriguez moved forward, her expression earnest. "Chief Johnson, I want you to know that your daughter was brave and polite throughout this ordeal. She did absolutely nothing wrong." Amara nodded slightly in acknowledgement, before turning her attention to Rebecca Wilson, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort. "And you must be Rebecca Wilson," Amara said, her voice deceptively calm. "The concerned citizen who reported my daughter as suspicious." Rebecca lifted her chin defiantly, though her confidence had clearly been shaken. "I was reporting suspicious behavior around the community mailboxes. I had no idea who she was." What exactly was suspicious about my daughter examining a rock with a magnifying glass? Amara asked the question razor-sharp. Rebecca hesitated, aware that every neighbor was watching, waiting for her answer. She was acting strangely, and when I asked where she lived, she couldn't give a proper address. She's 7 years old, Amara replied evenly. She was frightened by a stranger confronting her aggressively. Of course she got confused. Mr. Gonzalez stepped forward from the crowd. Chief Johnson, I witnessed most of this incident. Ms. Wilson approached your daughter in a very aggressive manner. She snatched a rock from Olivia's hand and began filming her with her phone. When Olivia tried to leave on her bicycle, she became so frightened that she dropped and broke her magnifying glass. Mrs. Ramirez joined him. The child was just playing, looking at rocks. She did nothing wrong. Amara absorbed this information, her jaw tight with controlled anger. She looked down at Olivia. Sweetheart, can you show me the rock you found, the special one? Olivia looked up hesitantly. The lady took it, she said, pointing at Rebecca. All eyes turned to Rebecca, who reluctantly reached into her pocket and produced the small gray stone with flecks of mica. This? Rebecca asked, holding it out between two fingers as if it were evidence of something illicit. This is what all this fuss is about, a plain rock. Amara took the stone, kneeling down to Olivia's level again. Is this your special rock, baby? Olivia nodded, her expression brightening slightly despite her tears. See the sparkles, Mommy. They look like stars. Daddy would say it has the best story. Amara examined the rock, turning it to catch the light, watching the mica sparkle. You're right, Olivia. It's beautiful. Your daddy would love it. She stood again, the rock now in her palm, and addressed the officers once more. This is what brought 3 police cars to my neighborhood today. A child finding a rock that reminded her of her late father. The words fell heavily laden with implications about prejudice, assumptions, and the misuse of police resources. Some neighbors looked away, uncomfortable with the truth being spoken so plainly. Officer Hayes cleared his throat. Chief, how would you like us to proceed with this situation? It was a loaded question, as both the victim's mother and the highest-ranking officer present, Amara's decision would set the tone for everything that followed. She considered carefully before answering. I want a complete incident report from each responding officer on my desk by 8 a.m. tomorrow. I want the 911 call pulled and preserved as evidence. And I want you to explain to Ms. Wilson the legal consequences of filing a false police report. Rebecca's face paled. False report? I was reporting suspicious. There was nothing suspicious about my daughter's behavior. Amara cut her off. You saw a black child in what you considered your neighborhood, and you decided she didn't belong. Then you called armed officers to remove her. Those actions have consequences, Ms. Wilson. Rebecca looked around at the neighbors, seeking allies and finding none. The community's silence spoke volumes. This isn't over. Amara continued, addressing the gathered crowd as much as Rebecca. What happened here today is a symptom of something deeper. And while I cannot change hearts and minds overnight, I can and will ensure that police resources are never again weaponized against innocent children in this community. She looked down at Olivia, who was leaning against her side, emotionally exhausted, but no longer crying. Ready to go home, sweetheart? Olivia nodded, clinging to both Luna and her recovered rock. As they turned to leave, Officer Rodriguez stepped forward once more. Chief Johnson, she said quietly, I want you to know that I observed several procedural issues in our response today. I'd like to address those in my report, if that's acceptable. Amara studied the young officer thoughtfully. I look forward to reading your assessment, Officer Rodriguez. With that, Amara took Olivia's hand and began walking toward their home, just 3 houses down from where this nightmare had unfolded. The crowd parted silently to let them pass, many neighbors looking ashamed or uncomfortable. Mrs. Ramirez called after them. "Olivia, remember you're welcome in my garden tomorrow to look for more special rocks." A small smile flickered across Olivia's tear-stained face, the first since this ordeal began. A tiny seed of resilience sprouting through the soil of trauma. As they walked away, Amara was acutely aware that this incident would ripple outward, affecting not just her family, but her department, this neighborhood, and perhaps beyond. What had happened to Olivia was not unique. Children of color experienced this kind of prejudice every day across the country. The difference was that most of those children didn't have mothers who were police chiefs with the power to demand accountability and create change. Amara squeezed Olivia's hand gently, making a silent vow. This would not be just another incident to be endured and forgotten. This would be a turning point for her family, for her department, and for Maple Grove. 1 year to the day after the incident on Maple Street, Amara and Olivia Johnson stood hand in hand before Marcus's grave in the Veterans Cemetery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the precisely arranged headstones, creating a peaceful pattern of light and dark. Olivia knelt and carefully placed her treasure rock at the base of her father's headstone, alongside a small bouquet of wildflowers they had collected on their walk through the cemetery grounds. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. "I brought you my special rock. It has a big story now." Amara watched silently as her daughter spoke to her father with the natural ease of a child who felt his presence despite his absence. The past year had been transformative for both of them, filled with challenges and healing setbacks and growth moments of pain and unexpected joy. "This rock helped change our whole neighborhood," Olivia continued, "and Mommy's police department too. I think you would be proud." She touched the polished surface of the headstone gently. "Mrs. Ramirez says sometimes the hardest things help us become who we're supposed to be. Like butterflies in their chrysalis. They have to struggle to get out, or their wings won't be strong enough to fly." The wisdom in her 8-year-old voice brought tears to Amara's eyes. Children absorbed so much, not just the trauma, but the healing that followed, the lessons learned, the strength discovered. Olivia looked up at her mother. "Do you think Daddy can see how everything changed?" Amara knelt beside her daughter, placing her hand next to Olivia's on the headstone. "I do. I think he's been watching over us the whole time." They remained there in peaceful silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. Finally, Olivia stood and brushed the grass from her knees. "Ready for the celebration?" Amara asked. Olivia nodded eagerly. "I can't wait to see the new community garden." They walked hand in hand back to their car, the morning sun warming their shoulders. As they drove toward Maple Grove, Olivia hummed softly to herself, Luna tucked safely in her backpack alongside her ever-present rock collection. The neighborhood had changed visibly as they approached. New community-designed banners hung from lampposts reading, "Maple Grove, where all belong." The once empty lot on Oak Street had been transformed into a vibrant garden space with raised beds, benches, and a small playground. Residents were already gathering for the 1-year anniversary celebration of what they now called Unity Day. Tables were being set up for the potluck, and Mr. Gonzalez directed volunteers hanging decorations from trees and fences. As Amara parked the car, she noticed Officer Rodriguez, now Sergeant Rodriguez, chatting comfortably with a group of teenagers near the community bench. The police presence at the celebration wasn't about surveillance or control. It was about partnership and belonging. "Chief Johnson, Olivia," Mrs. Ramirez called, waving from her special seat in the shade. "Come see what the children made." They joined the elderly woman, who proudly displayed a large, colorful banner created by the Rock and Butterfly Club. It featured painted handprints from each child surrounding a central image of a rock transforming into a butterfly, a symbolic representation of the neighborhood's journey. "It's beautiful," Amara said, genuinely moved by the children's artistic interpretation of their community's transformation. "The children understand more than we sometimes give them credit for," Mrs. Ramirez observed. "They see the truth clearly when adults often miss it." Olivia spotted Isabella and ran off to join her friends, who were arranging painted rocks around the base of a newly planted oak tree, a living monument to the community's growth. Mr. Gonzalez approached, offering Amara a cup of coffee. "Hard to believe it's been a year," he said, gazing around at the gathering. "So much has changed." "For the better," Amara agreed. "The reporter from the Tribune is here," he mentioned. "She wants to interview you about the long-term impact of the department reforms." Amara nodded. "I'll speak with her later. But the real story isn't about policies or protocols. It's about all of this." She gestured to the community around them. Neighbors greeting each other with genuine warmth, children playing freely across yard boundaries, elderly residents engaged in conversation with young families. "True security doesn't come from suspicion and exclusion," she said quietly. "It comes from belonging and connection. That's what we've built here." As the celebration officially began, Mr. Gonzalez called everyone to gather around the community bench near the mailboxes, the place where everything had started a year earlier. "1 year ago," he began, "a painful incident forced us to look honestly at who we were as a community. Today we celebrate who we've become and who we're still becoming." He invited Olivia forward, and the crowd applauded as she approached shyly, Luna clutched in one hand for courage. "Olivia," Mr. Gonzalez said gently, "would you do the honors of placing the final stone in our community mosaic?" The neighborhood-wide art project they had begun at the first Unity Day had been completed section by section throughout the year, with each family contributing stones that represented their unique stories and cultures. One space remained empty in the center, waiting for this moment. Olivia knelt beside the mosaic and carefully placed a small heart-shaped stone in the final space. The completed image, a tree with deep roots and spreading branches, now symbolized the neighborhood's shared identity and commitment to growth. "This stone represents all of us," Olivia said, her voice clear despite her shyness, "because we all belong here together." The simple words spoken by a child who had once been made to feel like an outsider captured the essence of everything the community had learned. The applause that followed wasn't just for Olivia's bravery or the completed mosaic. It was an affirmation of the truth she had expressed. As the celebration continued around them, Amara watched her daughter rejoin her friends racing across the community garden with uninhibited joy. The image of Olivia freely exploring her world, confident, curious, unafraid, was the most meaningful measure of how far they had come. The neighborhood had been transformed, not by forgetting what happened, but by learning from it. The police department had been reformed not by ignoring past failures, but by acknowledging them honestly and committing to do better. And Olivia had healed not by erasing her trauma, but by integrating it into a larger story of belonging and resilience. From pain had come progress. From crisis had come community. From one child's experience had come changes that would benefit countless others. As Amara joined the celebration, accepting a plate of food from Mrs. Patterson and stopping to admire the Patel family's contribution to the garden, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey, difficult as it had been at times. The community they had built together was stronger and more beautiful, precisely because they had faced the hardest truths about themselves and chosen to grow through them rather than around them. Like Olivia's metamorphic rocks, transformed by pressure and heat into something more precious than before. If you've stayed with this story until the end, perhaps you've recognized echoes of your own community within it. The assumptions sometimes made the divisions that can form the healing that becomes possible when we truly see each other. The journey of Maple Grove isn't just a story about racial bias or police reform. It's about the fundamental human choice we all face. Will we build walls of suspicion or bridges of understanding? Will we view differences as threats or as opportunities to grow? Will we define belonging narrowly or expansively? These questions play out every day in neighborhoods across the country, not always in dramatic confrontations, but in small moments of inclusion or exclusion, in assumptions made or challenged, in hands extended or withdrawn. What happened to Olivia Johnson could happen to any child who is seen first through the lens of bias, rather than the lens of humanity. But what happened afterward in Maple Grove could also happen in any community willing to confront uncomfortable truths and commit to genuine change. If this story has moved you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these important stories that need to be told. Share this video with someone who might need to hear its message. Sometimes, one story can open eyes and hearts in ways nothing else can. Remember, change begins with awareness. It continues with action. And it succeeds when an entire community decides that everyone truly belongs. Drop a comment below with the word justice if you believe every child deserves to feel safe and welcome in their own neighborhood. Together, we can build communities where rocks are just treasures waiting to be discovered, and children are free to explore their world without fear. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember that the most powerful words we can share with each other are simply, "You belong here."